One aspect I wanted to talk about is obviously the server issue. Like, basically, here's how I think of it. You can definitely still get really good players. You always will. That's down to scouting, analytics, how you develop them, what environment you put them in. We've discussed a lot of that. But obviously, if the top of the funnel is way more narrow than Europe, there's just not going to be as many come through. And the odds of getting one is lower, right? But one aspect I wanted to bring up, because people always talk about the quality of solo queue, and that's like a historic thing that people complain about. Probably also because, to be fair, fans can engage with that, and then they can complain about solo queue and whether it's good or bad. Well, one aspect I wanted to do, I always try to think laterally. Like, when someone says basically there's a problem and there's no solution, so let's just forget about it. It's like you've got to try and think is the ways around it. So one angle I had was the old school way you would have done it if it had been a world where you didn't have to keep playing LCSs. Maybe you would send the team for constant Korean boot camps. So what I thought was, is there a way you could do the opposite? Like this is a ridiculous... I'm going to float this. It might be a totally stupid idea. Maybe you'll shoot it down completely. But is there a world where, in the same senses, they tried to laterally get around the practice angle by having the in-houses? That's what all the players thought they wanted. They wanted to have other pros play. Essentially what they're saying is, I just want my play when I'm not with my team to be higher quality. I want it to be better players. Could there be a world where, since the one thing NA always has is the money... Could there be a world where there's like houses set up in NA? Listen, obviously not right now. This is not the perfect time to present this solution, but I'm just throwing it out there. And you fly over the top 10 solo queue players from LPL, from Korea, but the ones that aren't in teams. You just fly them over and you tell them, listen, you come over for 2 or 3 weeks, you play here, it improves the quality of solo queue, or maybe we scrim our players against them, whatever it is. Then you go back and then I bring in, 2 months later, I bring in another lot. You could use this either as a practice mechanism just to improve the quality. Is it too ridiculous an idea? Like, would you ever even consider spending money on something like that? Is it a wild one?
It's a little wild. I mean, one, it's impossible because, visas and immigration, and you have to qualify to be part of the league in order for all that to go through, and so it's not possible. I mean, maybe on tourist visas for 30 days at a time. But the concept of NA SoloQ not being good as other regions, I think, has some real merit based on what I've heard from players. We have a much smaller server in comparison to the LPL, right? It's just not just by a little bit, by a lot. And so
like 10 servers that are bigger than ours.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even close. I don't know the math because I don't think Riot's ever shared it. But if you knew the math, you'd be like, oh wow, the fact that they, went 3-3 at Worlds, given the fact that they have a server size of the size, is actually maybe pretty friggin' impressive.
It basically makes TL beat an IG that time like one of those like Miracle on Ice moments, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues.
Like, make this happen.
We have a ping issue.
Yeah.
We have just a queue issue. Like, when you queue up in Korea, for a challenger game, you get the game immediately. Out here in the United States, it could be like 20 to 30 minutes before you even get a game. So yes, it's going to be the slow ping. Then it's going to be waiting. So you're going to fraction of the game is because of it. And then once you get into the game, it's interesting. Like in Korea, if the game is going badly, if one side is really playing poorly, the game is pretty much given up really quick. So in Korea, you can get like 5 games in an hour, and you'll be lucky to get 1.5 here in North America. So just the number of games, you're getting a lot less. The quality, because the ping is higher, and the quality of the players is worse. So it's not just one thing; it's just a snowball effect of bad. And so, it's the speed of light issue, ping issue is like something we just can't solve unless they move the server out to the West Coast, or we actually have like an FPL type situation where the players actually participate. We're not going to be able to fix that one. And then the number of people playing, that's another like real issue. I'm not quite sure how we're going to fix. I do think that we could adjust the quality of play, though. I think that if we see more pros really pushing for other people to have a better, higher quality of play in these games, that we could impact that.
I mean, obviously on that angle, that's actually one area, if people don't know, that actually people often compliment Sven, that supposedly when he plays solo queue, he not only plays it seriously, but even has this thing where he says, he just tells like his teammates, like, pick your best champions and let's just win the game or something. Like, he tries to sort of encourage the randoms that aren't pros to play properly, right? Along those lines, though, like, obviously, it's all well and good to tell your pro players, play seriously, pretend it was a real game, all that stuff, right? Which is, it's hard to do with young people. Like, is there a way, you maybe alluded to it there, one of the issues I see is the in-house argument, it's an okay one, it's not a terrible concept. Like, I can see what they think the value is. The problem is, for me, the closest thing you could get to a solution is, like you said, it's something like what we have in CSGO. It's having like an FPL where the idea would be you'd have all the pros and all the academy players. And listen, if you just have them already, you've got a pretty good solid pool, like 100 people there. You can but the issue there is, and this is an area you don't have in Counter-Strike, is the developer of League of Legends doesn't want all the pros leaving solo queue and going and playing off in some little hermetically sealed, development area. Like, unfortunately, the thing about League is they very much want to hook it into the casual experience. Like, they want you to believe there's this path to pro and that you can go and play versus Sven and Licorice and who else. So how do you resolve that? Is that an issue at this point in time? Could you make like this FPL and Riot wouldn't have a problem? What do you think on that one? It's a bit of a tricky one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's already made. Face has already made like a platform that
can you get everyone to play on it then?
That's like, I'm not sure if like approvals from Riot are out there, and I'm not sure, like, I don't know if the players will actually use it, but it's like the technology is there. There is an answer there, and I do hope that we can see it getting used, because I do think that if we had a really healthy FPL style environment for our pros, it would help a lot.
Yeah, the tech is there. It's possible, and that solves the ping issue and the queue time issue and all that. So. Yeah, and I think that happened. Was it last year or maybe the year before? I can't remember. Allowed it. Yeah, so that is possible.
And maybe like with there's going to be a lot more investment in the amateur scene. Like part of the problem is, again, like more players playing at a pro level. So if the amateur scene like is developed more and we see more players that would be qualified for like an FPL type environment, then maybe we'll see a player base at the highest pro level that's actually acceptable. But there's a lot of ifs there.
Yeah.
And part of it too is that we can concede some of these issues. We will never have a server size that is in any way comparable to some of these other competitive regions. Okay, wave the white flag. We need to win somewhere else. Like, attack on a different front. You know what I mean? Like, let's figure out an alternative path. And I think we've made some pretty good progress. I can't speak for some of the teams in LPL or LCK, but they may be looking to NA and being like, wow, they've really figured out that, like, the software that they built to record VODs and comms and, that they use to replay, or maybe it's the sports psychology that they put in place and all the mental coaches. Like, we're kind of envious of that because we think that that's working. And so I think we just need to look to other ways of having players get better at the game without just repeat playing solo queue. And that requires us to approach the problem in a different orientation to get at equal or superior result. And I think there are teams, I know we are trying some of those methodologies. I've seen other teams, word gets around about what's working. So sometimes the process and methodology can be more efficient than repetitive gameplay, right? And it's not like the physiology is any different that makes one region, player potentially more skilled than another region. It just has to do with like the infrastructure that's in place. And so that's where I think where we can, as a region, have a good shot at it becoming a competitive advantage.
That's also go on.
I would like to see us approach all these different avenues of ways to improve it, because it's definitely not one problem. I think what Steve says is really right, and I also think, like, was going back to something you said earlier, was that there was a fear that if you import players, they're not going to be popular. But our league's most popular player that just retired, Pederson, he's an import. So like it's wrong. That's actually a wrong way to think. And I would love to see the import restrictions eased or just removed, because I do not believe we're going to see suddenly this lack in fandom in North American esports at all. I actually think the opposite would be true, that we would start seeing more and more top players coming to North America, and that as a region, as more victories internationally happened because of that, there would actually be more fans of esports, and so it's not just like one answer. Let's not just solve the solo queue issue. Let's just solve the quality of the play, but let's open up like who we can actually bring in here, because I think the reasons for keeping such tight imports in our league doesn't really make sense.
What about listen, that's actually, obviously, again, that's lateral thinking because you're thinking outside of what the current rules are. But again, people's perception is that Riot won't want that, because if people don't know, famously, there was that LMQ team that was all Chinese right before they started to do the import restrictions. And then also, there was even stories back then that like loads of the like Koreans that had just fallen off. It was actually the people who came through Challenger later, like Mad Life and all those guys. They were supposedly all going to come to America and make a Korean team and thought they were going to win LCS. Right? Obviously, back then, Riot didn't want it. I could see an argument, though, for what you're saying, which is, listen, if we're not going to compete at the moment comparable to the absolute best regions, we're not going to win worlds, for example. Well, if we're still going to have people play the game casually, it's still a region of entertainment. Like, why can't our teams essentially just have the best players? Why can't it be like European soccer, where you can just buy whoever you want and put them on your Premier League team? And it doesn't matter that, listen, if I'm from Manchester, I support the team from Manchester. It doesn't matter the players from Africa or fucking could be Korea, could be anywhere. So would you think Riot could go for that, though? Because obviously they've shown apprehension in the past, but maybe for NA alone they could open the gates.
Well, I think
it has to be a global rule, right? But go ahead, sir.
Oh no, I was just going to say, like, one could be the obvious, which is increasing the number of allowable imports for NA teams, and obviously giving enough advance time in order for that to not interfere with current contracts, and teams have time to plan for that, right? It's not like, oh, we're starting that in January. Sure. It's in November now. Like, I can't do that, obviously. So that's one way. But then the other way is what they have already demonstrated with the OPL, right? Where you open up certain regions that have players that would not count as imports, and that opens up the pool, right? Yes. Like, and so now NA has a bigger player base or server base of potential players that can play, and that opens it up and provides more flexibility, more of a chance of developing what would be considered non-import or NA talent for the purposes of the league.